Well, here we are in the hustle and bustle of downtown Los Angeles, specifically the financial district of LA. We're literally steps away from some of the biggest buildings I've ever seen that represent some of the biggest financial institutions in the world. Here it is where people store their wealth. They invest here, they grow their wealth here, and along with that are thousands of people, consultants, advisors, bankers, that help them take care of their wealth and keep it in a safe place and even help them grow it. Well, as we continue this study called Cost and the price for following Jesus Christ, it might surprise you that Jesus himself was quite the financial advisor. When we get to Matthew chapter 6, we find him telling us what we should do with our treasures. When we come to Matthew chapter 6, verse 19, it's about halfway through Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he gives us all kinds of teachings for life. And here he begins talking about treasure. In verse 19, he says, "Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." There's a couple of teaching things I just want us to review here before we go on to some application. The first is, this is very personal because Jesus is talking about our investment. He says, these are treasures for yourselves in verse 19, and in verse 20, lay up for yourselves. So he's saying, I want you to invest. There's nothing wrong with treasures. There's nothing wrong with all that God's given you and using it for something for the future. But I want you to make the wise investment. According to Jesus, there's two kinds of investment you can make. You can make an earth investment. You can store up money like in this district that we're surrounded by right now. You can put investments and money and wealth, and you can store it up. But there's two things that can happen to money. I should say that will happen to money. One is it'll go away somehow. It will be corrupted. It will decay. Somebody will spend it. Eventually money will go the way of moth and rust. The other way it goes away is that maybe somebody can steal it. If somebody doesn't steal it, actually, time will steal it from you and you'll no longer have it. Here's one thing we need to understand along with Jesus. Whatever treasures we have here on earth, they will not last forever. So Jesus says, here's a wise investment tip. I want you to store up your treasures in heaven, because in heaven, they won't decay. In heaven, they'll last forever. In heaven, no one can come and take them from you. And so Jesus gives us this great advice. He says, listen, I want you to lay up treasure for yourselves, but not on earth. That's a bad investment. I want you to lay it up in heaven, because that's a good investment. Jesus is telling us if you will invest in heavenly treasure, then it will never go away. Nothing can steal it, nothing can corrupt it. It will last for eternity. Let's take a little bit of a deeper dive into these verses together to understand this word that Jesus is using, treasures. The Greek word is actually a word you'll recognize in the English language. It's the word thesaurus. A thesaurus is a dictionary that has synonyms and antonyms because it's a treasury of English language, of words. And Jesus uses this word in the first century. It was a place where you stored all of your goods. If you had wealth, if you had money, if you had valuables, you stored them somewhere. It's called a thesaurus. And Jesus says everybody has to store something somewhere. And he uses this word and he calls it treasure for us. And so in our time together that remains, I just want us to consider our treasures with two questions and two actions. So the first question we need to consider is, how do we discover our treasure? We come to that verse 21. Jesus tells us, here's how to discover your treasure. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. There's really two parts to that. The first part is your heart. And I think Jesus is talking about, what are you passionate about? What do you use your time passionately for? What do you use your talents, your God-given abilities passionately for? Some of that can be work for us. Some of that can be pursuing a goal like graduation or a good job. Some of that might be a hobby like golf or fishing or running. It can be anything that just makes our heart beat fast. For some of us, it's talking trash with our best friend about our favorite sports team because we're passionate. Our heart is involved deeply in something we care about. Jesus is saying, if your heart's there, your treasure, your money will probably also follow along after. Now, the other part of this is the treasure part. Another way we can figure out our heart and our treasure is by saying, what am I spending my resources on? Where is my wealth going? Maybe you just want to look at the last week or the last month or the last year. Maybe you share this with your small group. Maybe you do this in a family. Maybe you just do it individually. But where is all of the money that God has given you going? What are you spending it on? And you'll find probably the thing that you spend the most money on is what you're most passionate about. In other words, Jesus says it this way, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. You can't separate the two. So the answer to the question is, how do we find what we really treasure? Find your treasure or find your heart, because they're both the same. Well, now that we've considered together that question about where our treasure is, we need to move on to the next question, and that is, how do we invest our treasure, or how do we lay up our treasures in heaven, as Jesus encourages us to do? And again, I think we have to go back to these two different parts. The heart. What is your passion, and how can you take your heart and passionately use it to lay something up in heaven? Well, I think we have to get close to the heart of Jesus in order to do this. And I can tell you for sure that if Jesus were still here in the flesh, He would be healing people and He would be serving people. And so, believe it or not, you can store up treasure in heaven by using your time and your God-given abilities, your talents, to serve people and to bring healing into their lives. So maybe as a small group, maybe as an individual, maybe with some friends, you want to identify some people around you in your community that need healing or need serving. And just make a commitment to serve them and bring healing into their life. You can actually become passionate about serving and healing other people. And that gets your heart laying up treasures in heaven. The other part, obviously, is your wealth, the money that you have. Some have more, some have less. But what are you doing with your wealth that will last forever? Of course, I always believe that when you invest or lay up treasures in the local church, which is carrying out the mission of God throughout the world, that's the best place to begin with your money. But also, there's all kinds of opportunities to help missions and missionaries, and actually to support kids throughout all the world, to help feed them and to clothe them and educate them. And when you do those things, you're actually doing that in the name of Jesus. Remember, Jesus says, if you clothe me, if you feed me, if you come visit me in prison, you're doing it for me. And so the best way for us to lay up treasures in heaven is to take our passion, our heart, and our time and treasure and serve and heal people, and then to take our resources, our treasures, and invest it in people so that they will enjoy an eternity together with God. So again, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. I pray for you this week as you discover where your treasure is.